Over the last year, I've had quite a lot on my plate. Every single day I write somewhere between 6,000 to 10,000 words for freelance writing clients. On top of that, I have been working for Android Authority as a tech journalist. That involves writing another 3,000 to 4,000 words, much more heavily researched. Often involves programming, sometimes also involves traveling somewhere to cover a live event, doing some filming, etc. On top of that, I've been running The Bioneer, that's the website and the YouTube channel, which I've grown to over 100,000 subscribers. I've written a whole book and I've gained a diploma. On top of that, I've been experiencing being a father for the first full year, which really does take up quite a lot of your time. And somehow on top of all this, I've still managed to socialise and watch all of Parks and Recreation. But I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't sometimes a bit burned out. I've definitely struggled with being overwhelmed, and sometimes I'm so in my own head, I've got so many different balls in the air that I forget crucial things and very basic things start going wrong. I drive people mad. But I've been using a bunch of different habits lately to try and improve this, and quite frankly, a lot of these I've been using for a long time, and if it wasn't for them, then I wouldn't have been able to do all that at all in the first place. So in this video, for other entrepreneurs and people who work online, or anyone who's facing a little bit of overwhelm or would like to achieve more in their day, these are some of my favourite productivity hacks. So the first one I want to talk about is something called eating the whole frog. And apparently this comes from a quote by Mark Twain that says, "If your job is to eat a frog, then you should do that first thing in the morning. If your job is to eat 2 frogs, then you should eat the biggest and ugliest one first." I'd also like to add to that you should probably change your job. But basically what he's saying here is that you need to do the biggest, most ugly task first, and that's something I subscribe to 100%. I think if I'm starting my day and I've got to write a 10,000 word ebook on something, then I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do that before I do anything else. That means before I answer any emails, that means before I do any smaller tasks or anything I want to do. This is important because it basically means that I'm providing the most value as quickly as possible. I'm doing the biggest task, which is probably going to get me paid the most, probably going to win over clients the most, and at the same time it means that's no longer hanging over me. And if I run out of time at the end of the day, it's much easier to fit in something small that you're looking forward to doing than it is to fit in something huge that you don't want to do. So instead of putting it off, just get it out the way, and this also acts as great training. It builds great habits. This is actually why I get so annoyed at clients who just want to talk and send emails and discuss changing things every 2 minutes, because I'm just like, if you're paying me to do something, if you want me to do something, then let me do it. It's this simple rule that's allowed me to be as productive as I have been over the last 5 to 10 years. Of course, sitting down and doing the most horrible thing that you don't want to do first isn't always easy, and that's why I really like a tip from the book How to Save an Hour Every Day by Michael Heppel. He says that you should use little rewards throughout the day and set smaller benchmarks and goals to get your work done. So for instance, most of us will start a working day at 9, we'll go and make ourselves a coffee, we'll browse through emails, maybe have a cheeky look at Facebook, and then sit down to do the first thing we need to do that day. It's like 9:30 and you've achieved nothing, and that's quite a deflating way to start your day. So instead, sit down, eat the whole frog, set out to write that 10,000 word ebook or to do that huge data entry project, but then set yourself a target so that when you've done X amount of words or entered N number of data rows, then you can go and have your coffee. And then when you've done another chunk of work that you set as a goal, then you can go and answer those emails. Now it gets to 9:30 and you've already bitten off a huge chunk of the work you've got to do, and you feel far better about yourself as a result. Not only that, but you often find you end up pushing yourself a little bit further. Once you get to 2,000 words and it's going really well, you're like, well, I can do 2,500 before I have my coffee. You'll also drink less coffee, and if you're anything like me, that's a really good thing because, well, I have a caffeine addiction. Another way you can encourage yourself to dive straight into that big task that you really don't want to do is to leave a project unfinished the day before. This is quite counterintuitive because most of us think that we should try and polish everything off and close it up for the day. But actually, if you know that you've got 10,000 words to write on a book tomorrow, tonight, before you go home, try and write 500 words or 400 words. What this does is it opens it up, so it means that it's started. Firstly, that means you don't have that jarring friction of starting a new project, which is the hardest bit to do, especially first thing in the morning when you're tired. At the same time, the brain hates things being unfinished, and so the fact that there's an open, unfinished task just sitting there on your desktop means you're far more likely to open it up and get stuck straight in because you want it done. But if you do get into work and you need to start something fresh and you didn't have any warning the day before, then you might find yourself staring at a blank screen. And it's not just writers who struggle with writer's block. So another tip I can give you is to just start writing, start entering data, start coding. Don't worry about the fact that your brain is kind of slowly trying to churn into gear and you're kind of lagging behind. You're not sure if what you're writing is great quality, maybe not even really engaged with it. just get writing because you'll get into the flow. Then you can always go back and check if what you wrote was okay, but in order to get into that flow state, in order to get productive, you need to just push past that initial resistance. And again, this is really good training, and it'll become easier and easier for you to just dive into work as a result. Something else that I do that's really useful to me anyways, is to think about how I'm going to spend my time in between work, and that means prepping for the next day. And I do this by doing research, by thinking about problems, when I'm not actually working. It's really important that you take downtime, that you rest properly. So I'm not saying that you should do this all the time throughout your evening, but if you're stuck in traffic, in the car, if you're waiting in a queue, or if you're just happy to think about work because it's actually something you enjoy, which is kind of important, I'll get back to that in a moment, then why not think about the project you're going to do? And this is quite cool because sometimes I'm just standing there staring into space, and then a friend or a family member will say, "What are you doing?" And I say, "Programming." Which is cool, right? Because you can think of solutions to programming problems, and you can think of article structures, and you can think of your arguments whilst you're not sat in front of a computer. And if you do that the night before, when you're relaxing or doing something else, then when you go to work the next day, you can just boom, get on with work and churn it out. I really love researching topics for the Pioneer in the evening. I write about things I'm really interested in, whether it's productivity, whether it's neuroscience, whether it's training, and so I'm more than happy to just sit there and flick through different articles on my iPad, or to listen to audiobooks or some cooking, etc. And like many people on YouTube, lately I've been using something called Notion to keep all these ideas in one place. Notion lets me stick any articles that I find, any useful notes or any ideas, all into one place that I can open up easily to refer to when I'm working later on. I'll make a video in future on my favourite apps and my favourite tools for productivity. If this is something you'd like to see, let me know in the comments down below. But like I say, you shouldn't do this all night with stuff that you really don't want to do. If you get home from work and you spend your whole evening thinking and worrying about the project you've got to do the next day, then you're not going to rest, you're not going to recover, and you won't perform optimally the next day. So you do need that downtime, you do need proper rest. That's kind of like the yin to the yang of productivity. But like I say, it doesn't matter so much if what you're doing is something that you actually really want to do. And if you can achieve that, if you can make sure that what you're doing is something you really want to do, then this will make a huge difference and be a massive boon and help you to be far more productive. The most important key ingredient to do your best work and to be happy churning out huge amounts of volume is to be passionate and to be inspired by it. Inspiration is different from motivation. Motivation is pushing yourself to do something when you don't want to. Inspiration is having exciting ideas about the thing, dreaming about how it's going to look when it's finished, and being excited to get started on it. So how do you become inspired about work that you don't really want to do? First of all, if you find that you keep having to do work that you don't find inspiring at all, then I suggest you have a real think about the work you're doing. Consider changing jobs. Obviously this isn't always an option, and even if you love your job, you won't love every single part of what you're doing. So another thing to do is to try and look at whatever it is you're doing and make it more interesting. So if there's a particular task you have to do, find a way to either gamify it or just to do your very best job. Look at great inspirational examples of the work you're doing. Think about the craft that goes into it. Think about the artistry that maybe you're not thinking about properly, and then find a way to turn this into something that you can feel pride in and that you can get excited to do. But like I say, in an ideal world, choose a job where you are inspired by what you do, and you'll be more than happy to put in extra time, and you will find that to be relaxing because it's what you'd be doing in your downtime anyway. Then there are all those little smaller niggling tasks that get in the way, and a lot of people say, Tim Ferriss for instance says, that you should close open loops. An open loop being anything like an email that you don't want to respond to, booking your tax, calling a client, all these small tasks that don't take much time, but they take a lot of mental effort to think about. So how do you marry this idea, closing those open loops as soon as possible, with just doing that big chunk of work right away? Do you do the big chunk of work, or do you close the open loops? How can you do both? The answer, I think, is that those open loops should never even make it onto your to-do list in the first place, because you should tackle them immediately. This is what some people refer to as the 1-minute rule. If you take plates out into the kitchen, don't stick them on the side, stick them in the washing machine. I mean dishwasher, I always say that. I always call the dishwasher the washing machine. If it's an email for a client you have to answer, just answer it right away. In other words, don't let these things play on your mind so that you have a huge task list of things to do that's going to drag you down and make you feel miserable. Instead, just tick them off right away so you don't even need to think about them when you start work and you start that big project. If they're longer than 1 minute, do them at the end of the day, or create a snippet of time, create a chunk of time to tackle them in. The exception to this 1-minute rule, of course, is whilst you're focused on that big chunk of work. Read the book Deep Work by Cal Newport, it's really good. He talks about the importance of being completely focused on your work and not being interrupted by WhatsApp or Slack. So in other words, turn off those notifications so that you're not being constantly pestered by them, so that you can just focus on the work you need to do. That way it's not a question of do you do the big task or the small task, because those smaller interruptions don't arise in the first place. Ideally, you want to be in a state of almost sensory deprivation when you're working on these big tasks. Some of these smaller tasks will be recurring things that come up again and again, like putting on that dishwasher. And I'm not just talking about productivity in the office or at work, but also at home, because these things do overlap. So when it comes to doing the dishwasher or answering emails, These are kind of recurring tasks that you know you're going to have to do most days, so I recommend finding a way to schedule them into your routine so that you can put them into the most efficient block of time where you're already doing something else. I always do the dishwasher in the morning, for instance, whilst I'm also making my daughter's breakfast. This is just a good slot of time to do it, and I give her some toys to keep her busy in the high chair. Zombie tasks are particularly good for this. Zombie tasks are any tasks that don't require your conscious mind, something that you could do whilst watching television. So for instance, that can mean making a thumbnail, because design I can do whilst doing something else. So I always like to make my thumbnail whilst watching TV in the evenings, because that way I can be present and chat to my wife, I can watch TV, and at the same time I can create thumbnails that I know I'm going to have to do every single week. That's a recurring task. And if there are tasks that you know you should do regularly and you just can't bring yourself to do them, like tidying your office, you can try one more tip from the book Atomic Habits. This is called temptation bundling, and basically it means you take something you don't want to do, like tidying your office, organizing, or deleting old emails, and then you bundle that with something that you do like to do, for instance, drinking a nice coffee. So this is another time where you can use a reward like that to make something more bearable. Or maybe you listen to a podcast, or maybe you listen to something else that's interesting. Maybe this is a really nice coffee, like a delicious latte or cappuccino. And the reason that's important is because you're only going to do this thing when you do that bad task. So the only way to get the nice thing is to do the task you don't want to do. Suddenly, you're more likely to do that task. I do recommend that you keep all these smaller to-dos written down so that you don't forget them. And I really like the app Todoist. There's many more like it. I'm really interested in getting an Apple Watch because I love the idea of having Todoist on my wrist. But for now, it's great on my phone, and I can just tick things off as I go through the day. And I can even just ask Alexa to add things to my to-do list when I think of something new. So I hope you found this video useful and interesting, guys. If you did, then please leave a like down below, comment and subscribe. That stuff all helps me out immensely. I did mention a while back that I was thinking of working on a new channel called The Biomatrix, where I was going to talk specifically about productivity and working online. And I was going to do that separately from The Bioneer, that would focus more on fitness. But I asked on Instagram if that was something you wanted me to do, and you all said you'd rather it was all in one place, because that's partly what makes this channel unique. It's not just fitness, it's self-improvement in general, including a lot of fitness, a lot of training, and a lot of neuroscience and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm going to be keeping these kinds of videos on the channel. I'm going to be doubling down on them. So let me know what you think, and if there's any topics you'd like me to cover in future. Share your favorite productivity hacks down below, or if you've got any books and things. I love getting your tips. Really appreciate that. Thanks a ton for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.